Hey everybody, welcome back to our next video as we continue on going through our Lenten journey focus thing, Bible study, whatever we want to call it, different characters and different ways that they encounter the presence of God through various types of brokenness. This week, our character that we are focusing in on is Mary Magdalene, and we are looking specifically at Luke chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. Also, within our Wednesday evening scripture, we're going to be combining that along with Luke 24, 1 through 10. And the brokenness that Mary experienced is brokenness by demons. Now, let me preface by this one by saying demons is something we don't really know what to do with. And that's okay, but they are named within the Bible, within the Gospels, as something that Jesus heals or a force that Jesus sometimes deals with, and Mary is no exception. So that's why we're focusing in on that one. Now, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to give some background on the name Mary in general, because it's actually a really, really popular name, and there's a lot of Marys that pop up in the Gospels. Then I'm going to talk about what we know about Mary Magdalene, and then I'm going to say a little bit about what we speculate but don't know about Mary Magdalene. So that's what I'm going to talk about, and then you can unpack this story and what's going on here as you will. Here we go. So Mary Magdalene is, as I already mentioned, one of many, many different Marys in the Gospels. Now, we know of at least 3 different individuals other than Mary Magdalene that sometimes she gets conflated with and sometimes she doesn't, but there are a lot of Marys within the Gospels. We've got Mary, the mother of Jesus, who Mary Magdalene is not confused with for obvious reasons. But so that's one. We have Mary, the sister of Lazarus and Lazarus. I'm having trouble talking today. Mary, the sister of Lazarus and Martha. And then we have Mary, the mother of James. So those are just 3 different Marys that I was able to rattle off right off the top of my head. There may be others as well, but Mary, a very, very common name. Now, the reason for that is Mary was the common Greek version of the Hebrew name Miriam. Now, if you remember the name Miriam, Miriam is the sister of Moses and Aaron. She was one of the fellow leaders of the Hebrew people or the Israelite people during the period of the Exodus. She was very, very, very important. And because of her importance throughout Jewish culture, it's very, very common to name girls after her, to name them Miriam or the Greek equivalent of Mary. So that's why we have so many Marys that pop up. Now, as I mentioned before, oftentimes Mary Magdalene gets confused with or conflated with some of the different Marys. More on that in a bit. Both Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, as well as Mary, the mother of James, sometimes get conflated with Mary Magdalene. Definitely not Mary, the mother of Jesus, though. Again, obvious reasons. But so that's some of that. Now let's talk about the name Magdalene, or the title Magdalene, or the nickname Magdalene. Most scholars believe this to be a reference to her hometown of Magdala, which was a small fishing village on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. Similar in scope to Capernaum that I've talked about before. Capernaum was a very bustling and important and rather large community right along the more the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Magdala is maybe 5 to 10 miles away from that. Again, also on the shoreline, kind of counterclockwise around the Sea of Galilee, more on the direct western shore. But so that is the community. And a lot of people just think she's called Mary the Magdalene because she's from Magdala. However, some recent scholarship that has come up just in the last couple of years have indicated that Magdalene might actually be a nickname that means the strong tower, and that she may have been the female counterpart among the disciples, and I'm using that term more loosely, not the 12 disciples, but among all of Jesus' disciples. She might have been the female counterpart to Peter. Now remember, Peter's a nickname as well. It means rock. Peter's name is actually Simon, but Jesus calls him Peter. So some speculate that Peter was the rock and Mary Magdalene was the tower. Now that's pretty recent, and that's just being explored kind of right now, but definitely interesting. Now, other scholars have suggested that she might be the unnamed beloved disciple in John's gospel. In John's gospel, we hear about the beloved disciple quite a few different times, and we don't know who it is. It's never named specifically. Some people think maybe it was Mary Magdalene. And some of that thinking comes around through what's known as the Gnostic Gospels. The Gnostic Gospels are not biblical, and I want to be clear about that. They are scripture type writing, and I'm using those air quotes really hard, but they are not found in the Bible. Now, there are many different of these Gnostic Gospels. Some of them do explore or talk about Mary Magdalene and some encounters that she has with Jesus, but again, they're not biblical, so I'm not going to go into those. But the last thing I'm going to say on this front is if you're familiar with a fiction author, Dan Brown, he speculates or he postulates that Mary Magdalene was the secret bride of Jesus and that they had kids, and that bloodline of Jesus has carried on through the generations. But again, fiction. Let me be clear on that. Regardless of these different scholarly or non-scholarly thoughts about Mary Magdalene, her importance cannot be questioned. And the reason for that is that she is the only individual who is named in all four Gospels as being present at the empty tomb. Sometimes, depending on which Gospel you're reading, encountering the risen Jesus, sometimes not, but she is the only individual as being named in all four Gospels as being present. So clearly, her importance cannot be understated. Now I want to switch over and talk about her various appearances. Now, throughout the Gospels, most of her appearances, the times when her name pops up, are limited to basically being present at the crucifixion and then the burial of Jesus, and then, as I just mentioned, being present at the tomb. In Matthew's Gospel, she pops up in chapter 27 and 28, which is those two accounts, and in Matthew's Gospel, she encounters the risen Jesus. In Mark, it's chapter 15 and chapter 16. Jesus does not appear in the short ending of Mark's Gospel. However, in the extended, longer ending of Mark's Gospel, ask me if you want me to expound on that, and I will. That's a side note. But in this added, extended ending of Mark's Gospel, seems to recount John's version and Jesus appearing to her. And also references the casting out of the demons that is present in Luke chapter 8. Speaking of Luke, I'll come back to Luke. Within John's Gospel, she pops up in chapter 19 and 20, same situations. She's at the cross and burial, and then at the resurrection. And she's the only one present at the empty tomb in John's Gospel. She finds the empty tomb, and then she runs off and tells the disciples, and then she comes back. And in the second time when she's there, that's when she encounters the risen Jesus. So the Matthew, Mark, and John, those are her appearances. And now let's talk about Luke. Luke's a little bit more extensive, although a little bit we have to make some extrapolations about her presence. It's very likely in some of them, but in a couple of these, she's not specifically named, so let me unpack that. In chapter 23, initially, we hear that the women from Galilee are present. Now, this is present at the crucifixion, at the cross, and then the burial. She's not named, but none of them are in this situation. But she is almost certainly among those who are present because she was from Galilee. Again, Magdala is in Galilee, and she's among that group of women who are following. Also, when Jesus is being led to the crucifixion, he tells the women not to weep for him. They're listed as those that followed him. That's specifically how it's named. So she's probably in that group too, although we cannot be certain because they're not named. Then in chapter 24, again, she's present at the empty tomb. They go and tell the disciples. Jesus does not appear to her or to the women in that particular gospel. But the one really in question is chapter 8. We hear this is early on in Jesus' ministry that he is traveling around the Holy Land. The 12 are with him, aka the 12 disciples are with him, along with a group of women that he had healed of demons and or sickness. And we hear Mary Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been driven out. Now, let me clarify, let me be clear. We know nothing about this story. We don't have anything that I could find that really unpacks this. this moment here in Luke's gospel and then that longer ending of Mark that I referenced earlier are the only references that we have to these 7 demons that apparently had plagued Mary Magdalene. Now, some speculate that it was one demon and it took 7 tries to really get the demon out. Some speculate because 7 is the number of biblical completion, that they just used that to show that she was completely cleansed of the possession. But those are speculations. We don't know anything beyond the reference that 7 demons have been cast out of her. So interesting, but we don't know much. Now, last thing I want to talk about is some misconceptions about Mary Magdalene, and really one big one. The big misconception about Mary Magdalene is that she is a prostitute, and there is zero biblical evidence of this. We do not know what she did. In fact, there are hints that she actually may have been a woman of great means and great wealth and helped to bankroll Jesus' ministry along with some other rather wealthy women that are with him. That's a side note. I can go into that if people are curious, but that's a side note. But there is no evidence that she's a prostitute or that she's a quote unquote sinful woman. Side note, and I'm just thinking this now, this is not in my notes. She's depicted that way within the movie Passion of the Christ, if you've seen that. She's depicted and almost conflated with the woman caught in adultery, that the crowd comes to Jesus and says, should we stone her or not? And then he writes in the sand, and let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Again, zero biblical evidence that's her. So I don't think it is. Now, as earlier stated, as I mentioned earlier, she's sometimes confused with Mary, the sister of Lazarus. And Mary, the sister of Lazarus, not Mary Magdalene, but Mary, the sister of Lazarus, anoints Jesus' feet and wipes it with her hair. This is John's version of that story. And interestingly enough, that's our gospel story for this Sunday. So this is very fitting. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the woman is not named. The woman who wipes Jesus, who anoints Jesus and wipes his feet with her hair. So we don't know who that is. However, in Matthew and Mark, they both place that event as happening in Bethany. Now, this is important because Bethany is the community that Lazarus and Mary and Martha are from. So this lends itself to the idea that it could be the same woman between Mark and Matthew and John, that being Mary, the sister of Lazarus, but we don't know. Now, Luke does not specify a location, but in the back and forth when Jesus is having the encounter with his host, who's named as a Pharisee in Luke's gospel, Jesus addresses him as Simon. Now, in Matthew and Mark, it's listed that he's at the home of Simon the leper. So we have these little details that kind of sort of seem to point us to it all being the same woman who did this. But again, the only time is when the woman is named is in John's gospel. And in John's gospel, it's Mary, the sister of Lazarus, who is almost certainly not Mary Magdalene. In fact, I will stake my reputation on it, and hopefully I'm not proven wrong. But so that's the deal. I have gotten way longer than I expected to, but that's a lot about Mary Magdalene, and I hope that you have a great conversation.